All right, today we're jumping into one of the most pivotal and honestly most dramatic books of the Hebrew Bible, Deuteronomy. It's this incredible mix of law, history, and poetry, all wrapped up in a leader's final, urgent farewell to his people. So let's get right into it.
So just imagine this for a second. You have a leader who has guided his people for 40 long years through a brutal wilderness. He's standing right on the edge of the promised land, but he knows he'll never get to enter it himself. He has one last chance to say everything he needs to say. That's the setup for Deuteronomy. So yeah, this is way more than just a collection of rules. It's a final, powerful, urgent appeal from Moses to the entire nation of Israel.
So here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. We'll start with the basics, Moses' final speeches, why the covenant needed renewing, and this really stark choice between a blessing and a curse. But then we're going to dig into some fascinating questions scholars ask, like who actually wrote this book? Was it some kind of blueprint for future kings? And we'll wrap up by asking if Deuteronomy is really about rigid laws, or is it about a relationship at its core?
Okay, so let's set the scene. You have to picture this. The Israelites have been wandering in the desert for 40 decades, 40 years. They're camped out in Moab, literally looking across the river at the land of Canaan. A whole generation that came out of Egypt has passed away. Now a new generation is standing there, ready to finally go in and build a home. The whole book is essentially framed as 3 final speeches from Moses. And in these speeches, he does a few key things. First, he looks back. He reminds them of their history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. He also goes over the laws from Mount Sinai again, but he kind of updates them for the new life they're about to lead. And woven through all of it is this super passionate, almost desperate call to be faithful to God. And right at the very heart of that call is this verse, known as the Shema. This is the central declaration of faith in Judaism. But it's so much more than just a theological statement. You have to understand, in a world that was jam-packed with different gods, this was a radical call for exclusive loyalty. Deuteronomy is basically insisting on a one-on-one, unique relationship between Israel and their God.
Now, this brings us to a really important question. A lot of the laws you read in Deuteronomy, well, they might sound familiar. A lot of it is a repeat of what's in earlier books like Exodus. So you gotta wonder, why say it all again? What's the point of this second law? Which, by the way, is literally what the name Deuteronomy means. The answer is all about the audience. It's simple, really. The generation that actually stood at Mount Sinai and heard the 10 Commandments, they're gone. The people Moses is talking to now were just kids back then, or they hadn't even been born. So for this new generation, the covenant had to be made personal. It couldn't just be their parents' story. It had to become their own commitment, right before they walked into their future.
And Moses makes it absolutely clear that this commitment isn't just some abstract idea. It comes with very real-world consequences. We're talking about the future survival and prosperity of the entire nation. The stakes just could not be any higher.
The book lays it out as a clear 2-path choice. It's incredibly direct. Path 1, obey the covenant. Stay faithful, follow the rules, and the result is life and blessing in the land. Path 2, disobey. Turn to other gods, walk away from the covenant, and the consequence is curse and being exiled from that very same land. It's a really stark and powerful way of framing their entire national destiny.
Okay, so that's the story inside the book. But the story of the book itself, well, that's where things get really interesting. Now, tradition says Moses wrote it, of course, but for more than a century now, scholars have been looking at a totally different timeline for when the book we have today was actually put together. Look at the huge time gap here. The traditional setting for Moses' speech is way back, around 1400 BCE. But many scholars look at the Hebrew, the writing style, and the fact that its structure looks a lot like Assyrian political treaties from the 7th century BCE, and they conclude that the final form of Deuteronomy probably came much, much later, during the time of the Israelite monarchy. And if you accept that later timeline, it raises all kinds of fascinating questions, especially when you see that some of the laws in Deuteronomy seem to be looking ahead to Israel's political future. This is where we get the idea that the book might have been a kind of blueprint for a king. Here's a key detail. Deuteronomy actually gives instructions for a future king of Israel. It tells them what he should and shouldn't do, like not collecting too many horses or wives or stockpiling wealth. And this is totally unique. None of the other first 5 books do this, mainly because they're set in a time long before Israel even had a monarchy.
So, this brings us to a central debate. Is this a prediction or is it a reflection?
If you go with the traditional timeline, these laws are an absolutely remarkable prediction of a political system that was still centuries away. But if you lean towards the scholarly timeline, then these laws look more like a commentary, or maybe even a critique of the monarchy after it was already a thing. It's like they're trying to guide future kings based on the successes and failures of past ones. Okay, finally, let's tackle a common idea about Deuteronomy. Because it is filled with hundreds of laws, it gets this reputation for being a really dry, legalistic rulebook. But is that really what's at the heart of it? You can really look at this book in two completely different ways. On the one hand, yeah, it's a list of rules and punishments. But on the other hand, it's all framed as a covenant. Think of it like an ancient treaty. And these ancient treaties weren't just about rules. They were about defining a relationship of loyalty, and they often used the language of love and allegiance to do it.
The motivation behind all the laws is really the key. Over and over, Deuteronomy grounds its commands in memory. The people are told to obey because God rescued them from slavery in Egypt. So it's not about trying to earn your way to salvation by checking off boxes. It's about responding with gratitude to this incredible act of liberation. From this perspective, the law is simply what the relationship looks like in practice.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. This ancient idea of a covenant, this foundational agreement that defines a people's identity, their laws, their shared purpose. It's an incredibly powerful concept. It really makes you wonder, where do we see echoes of that today? From national constitutions to community charters, how do we continue to use these ancient patterns to define who we are and how we choose to live together?